Emma stared at the ceiling, counting the small cracks that had formed over the years. 3 a.m. and sleep remained elusive, as it had for weeks now. Next to her, David slept soundly, his breathing steady and deep. Once, that sound had been comforting. Now it only highlighted the growing distance between them, how he could sleep so peacefully while their 15-year marriage crumbled around them. She remembered when they'd bought this house 12 years ago. They had been so young, so optimistic, painting walls on weekends and arguing playfully over furniture placement. Now those memories felt like they belonged to different people entirely. Emma slipped out of bed and made her way downstairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. In the kitchen, she made herself tea, the ritual providing small comfort in the darkness. Through the window, she could see the garden she'd lovingly tended, now beginning to show signs of neglect, much like their relationship. When had things started to change? There wasn't a single moment she could point to. Rather, it was a slow erosion. Conversations that became shorter, touches that grew rarer, irritations that festered instead of being resolved. They had become experts at avoiding conflict, yet strangers at expressing affection. David was a good man. That made it harder, somehow. There was no dramatic betrayal, no villainous behavior to justify the hollowness she felt. Just two people who had slowly grown in different directions until the space between them seemed impossible to bridge. Their daughter, Lily, was away at college now. For years, she had been their common ground, the reason they pushed through difficult patches. With her gone, the silence in the house became deafening, exposing all the things they'd left unsaid. Emma's phone lit up with a text from her sister. "How are you doing? Have you talked to him yet?" She hadn't. Weeks of therapy sessions alone had convinced her that divorce was inevitable, but saying the words out loud to David felt impossible. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would find the courage. Part 2. The conversation. The next evening, Emma prepared David's favorite meal, a peace offering of sorts, though she knew food couldn't soften what was coming. When he walked through the door, his tired smile reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with nearly 20 years ago. "This looks amazing," he said, hanging up his coat. "Special occasion?" "I thought we could talk," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Something in her tone must have alerted him. He paused, studying her face with newfound attention. "Everything okay?" They ate in strained silence, both picking at their food. When David finally put down his fork, Emma knew she couldn't delay any longer. "I've been seeing a therapist," she began. "I know," he said, surprising her. "I found the receipt in your purse when I was looking for the car keys last month. Why didn't you say anything?" David shrugged. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Or maybe you wouldn't. We don't really tell each other much these days, do we?" The simple truth of his statement stung. "No, we don't," she admitted. "And that's part of the problem." "What problem, Emma?" His voice was quiet but tense, as if bracing for impact. "I'm not happy, David. I haven't been for a long time." The words tumbled out now. "We live like roommates. We don't talk, we don't connect. I feel like I'm suffocating in silence." David's face remained frustratingly neutral. "Have you tried talking to me about this before now?" 100 times, in 100 ways, she said, fighting back tears. "But you never hear me." "That's not fair," he countered, an edge entering his voice. "You stopped trying years ago. You retreat at the first sign of disagreement. Because you shut down. You always have. Any time I bring up something difficult, you retreat into work or find some project in the garage. So, what are you saying, Emma? What do you want?" The moment stretched between them, taut and fragile. "I want a divorce," she finally said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. David didn't react immediately. He sat very still, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond her. Then he stood up, carried his plate to the sink, and methodically rinsed it before placing it in the dishwasher. "David, please say something," Emma pleaded. "What is there to say?" he asked, his back still to her. You've obviously made up your mind. That's not true. I've been trying to decide what to do for months. He turned to face her then, his expression a mixture of anger and pain. Months of considering ending our marriage, and you didn't think to include me in that conversation? 15 years together, and you make this decision alone. Emma felt a flash of guilt, but also frustration. Would it have made a difference? When was the last time we really talked about anything important? You don't get to blame this all on me, David said, his voice rising. Relationships take two people. You checked out long before I did. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened? When was the last time you suggested we do something together? You've been building walls for years, Emma. The argument escalated, years of unspoken resentments spilling into the open. They hurled accusations like weapons, each word widening the chasm between them. By the time David stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, Emma felt simultaneously drained and relieved. At least they had finally broken through the silence. Part 3. The Aftermath. The following weeks passed in a blur of awkward arrangements and painful decisions. David moved into the spare bedroom, the physical separation making their emotional distance concrete. They agreed to tell Lily together over video call, one of the hardest conversations of Emma's life. But why? Lily had asked, her face crumpling on the screen. I thought you guys were fine. Sometimes people grow apart, David explained gently. This isn't about you, sweetheart. That's what everyone says, Lily shot back. But it affects me too. What about holidays? What about when I come home? Where will home even be now? Emma had no satisfying answers, only promises that they both loved her and would work out the details. After the call ended, she cried for hours, questioning her decision, wondering if the pain she was causing was worth whatever uncertain future lay ahead. Friends and family reacted with varying degrees of shock and concern. Some took sides immediately, others offered well-meaning but unhelpful advice to work it out. Emma's sister Rachel was her rock, listening without judgment and helping her navigate the practical aspects of separation. David, meanwhile, retreated into himself. He spent long hours at work and when home, barely acknowledged Emma's presence. She caught glimpses of his pain only when he thought she wasn't looking, the slump of his shoulders, the distant gaze. It hurt to see him hurting, despite everything. They agreed to use a mediator rather than traditional lawyers, hoping to keep the process as amicable as possible. The first session was excruciating, sitting across from each other in a sterile office, discussing the division of their shared life like it was a business transaction. The house has significant equity, the mediator explained. You'll need to decide whether to sell it and split the proceeds, or if one of you wants to buy out the other's share. Their home, the place where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where they'd nursed each other through illnesses, where they'd watched Lily grow from a toddler to a young woman. Now reduced to an asset on a spreadsheet. I can't imagine living here without you, David admitted later that night, in a rare moment of vulnerability. Too many memories. Emma nodded, feeling the same conflict. Maybe it's better for both of us to start fresh somewhere new. That night, she found herself going through old photo albums, their wedding day, Lily's first steps, family vacations. They looked so happy in those frozen moments. Had it all been an illusion? Or had something real and precious slipped through their fingers when they weren't paying attention? Part 4. The Healing. 3 months into their separation, Emma found an apartment downtown, closer to her office. The space was smaller than she was used to, but it was hers alone, a blank canvas for whatever came next. Moving day was bittersweet, David helping load the truck with furniture they'd chosen together, now divided between them. I think that's everything, he said, closing the moving truck door. Emma looked up at the house one last time. 15 years of marriage packed up in 4 hours. David offered a sad smile. Not everything fits in boxes. They stood awkwardly, neither sure how to say goodbye. Finally, Emma stepped forward and hugged him briefly. Take care of yourself, David. You too, Em. As she drove away, Emma felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The finality of physically separating their lives brought fresh pain, but also a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The first few weeks in her new place were the hardest. The silence was different from the silence of her failing marriage, emptier, more complete. She found herself talking aloud just to hear a human voice. Sleep came fitfully in the unfamiliar space, and simple decisions felt overwhelming without another person to consult. Her therapist assured her this was normal. "You're grieving," she explained. "Not just the end of your marriage, but the end of the future you had imagined for yourself." Emma threw herself into creating new routines. She joined a book club, started taking weekend hikes, reconnected with friends she'd neglected during the worst years of her marriage. Slowly, she began to rediscover parts of herself that had been dormant for too long. David, according to mutual friends, was dating already, something that both hurt and relieved Emma. She wasn't ready for that step herself, but found comfort in small freedoms, sleeping diagonally across the bed, watching documentaries David would have hated, not having to compromise on dinner choices. Lily visited both their new homes during spring break, her presence highlighting the strangeness of their new arrangement. "It's weird seeing your stuff separated," she commented. "Dad has the blue mugs, you have the white ones. He has the landscape paintings, you have the abstract ones. Is it very hard going back and forth?" Emma asked carefully. Lily considered this. "It's not what I would have chosen," she said finally. "But I'm adjusting, kind of like you guys are." The divorce proceedings continued, with unexpected emotional landmines along the way. Discussions about money revealed different values they'd never fully addressed. Division of sentimental items forced them to articulate what really mattered to each of them. "I didn't realize you cared so much about your grandmother's china," David said during one tense discussion. "You never used it." "I was saving it for special occasions," Emma replied. "I guess I was waiting for the right moment that never came." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. 6 months into their separation, they met for coffee, the first time they'd seen each other socially since Emma moved out. The coffee shop was neutral territory, busy enough to fill awkward silences with ambient noise. "How's the new job going?" Emma asked. David had finally taken a position he'd been offered months earlier, one that better aligned with his interests, but that he'd hesitated to accept while their marriage was stable. "It's good," he admitted. "Challenging in the right ways. I should have made the change years ago." "Why didn't you?" He shrugged. "Seemed selfish to prioritize my happiness when we had Lily to think about, bills to pay. The responsible thing was to stay put." "I think I fell into that trap too," Emma said. "Putting off happiness for some future that never arrived." They talked for nearly 2 hours, more openly than they had in years. Without the pressure of saving their marriage, they found they could be honest about what had gone wrong. David acknowledged his tendency to avoid difficult emotions. Emma admitted she'd stopped communicating her needs clearly. "I wish we could have had this conversation 3 years ago," David said as they prepared to leave. "Would it have made a difference?" Emma asked. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but at least we would have tried." Part 5. The New Beginning. 1 year after that first painful conversation at the dinner table, Emma sat in the courtroom, waiting for their case to be called. The divorce was uncontested, the settlement fair to both parties. All that remained was this final formality. David sat beside his lawyer across the aisle, dressed in a suit she'd helped him choose years ago. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. They had come a long way from the anger and blame of those early days. When the judge called their names, they stood together at the front of the courtroom. The proceedings were brief and anticlimactic. A few questions, signatures on documents, the judge's routine words pronouncing their marriage legally dissolved. 15 years of shared life ended in less than 15 minutes. Outside the courthouse, they paused on the steps. "So, that's it," David said. "We're officially not married anymore." "Strange, isn't it?" Emma replied. I don't feel dramatically different. Me neither. He hesitated. I know this is an odd thing to say, but I'm proud of how we handled this. It could have been much worse. Emma smiled slightly. We finally learned how to communicate, just in time for it to be over. But it wasn't really over, of course. They would always be connected through Lily, through shared history, through the parts of themselves they had given to each other over the years. Lily graduated college that spring, both her parents sitting together at the ceremony, genuinely celebrating their daughter's achievement without tension. At the dinner afterward, Emma watched David laughing with Lily's friends and felt a complicated emotion that wasn't quite regret, but something adjacent to it. You okay, Mom? Lily asked, catching her expression. Just reflective, Emma answered. Your dad and I made a lot of mistakes, but you turned out wonderfully. That's something we did right. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Emma pulled out a journal she'd started keeping during the separation. The early entries were raw with pain and uncertainty, but as she flipped through the pages, she could trace the gradual healing, the slow building of her new life. She had dated a bit in recent months, nothing serious, but enough to remember she was still capable of connection, of attraction. David, she'd heard, had ended his brief relationship and was focusing on his career and reconnecting with old friends. They weren't friends, exactly, but they had reached something like peace. At Lily's graduation, they'd even managed to take a family photo together, genuinely smiling. Emma planned to frame it, not to cling to the past, but to honor it as part of her journey. 2 years after their separation, Emma's sister Rachel got married. Emma found herself seated at the reception next to David, an arrangement she suspected was Lily's doing. You look happy, he observed as they watched the dancing. I am, she said, realizing it was true. Different than I expected to be at this point in my life, but happy. You. Getting there, he answered. I've been thinking a lot about what happened to us. Emma tensed slightly. And? I think we weren't wrong for each other, he said carefully. We just stopped growing together. And we didn't know how to talk about it until it was too late. Emma considered this. I used to wonder if we could have saved it, if we'd tried harder, earlier. But now I think maybe this was always where we were headed. Some relationships aren't meant to last forever. Maybe their purpose is what they teach us, David suggested. And what did you learn? Emma asked, genuinely curious. David thought for a moment. That silence is more dangerous than conflict. That compromise without communication breeds resentment. That love isn't enough without work. He smiled ruefully. Expensive lessons. But valuable ones, Emma added. They watched as Rachel and her new husband shared their first dance, radiating joy and hope. Emma felt no envy, only a gentle wish that their road might be smoother than hers had been. Later, as the evening wound down, David offered her a ride home, which she accepted. The car ride was companionable, memories of their shared past no longer carrying the sting they once had. Outside her apartment building, David put the car in park, but left the engine running. I'm glad we had a chance to talk tonight, he said. Me too. Emma hesitated, then added, I hope you know that despite everything, I don't regret our marriage. It gave us Lily. It shaped both of us. No regrets here either, David said. Just gratitude for the good parts and lessons from the hard ones. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand briefly before getting out of the car. As she watched him drive away, she felt a sense of closure that had eluded her until now. Their story together had ended, but their individual stories continued, changed by their time together, but not defined by its ending. Inside her apartment, Emma kicked off her shoes and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The path that had brought her here had been painful and unexpected, but she wouldn't trade the person she had become along the way. She had learned that endings could also be beginnings, that loss could make room for growth, and that the breaking of one dream could lead to the discovery of another. The divorce had unraveled the fabric of the life she had planned, but from those threads, she was weaving something new, something authentically hers. And for the first time in a very long time, she was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Epilogue. 5 years after their divorce was finalized, Emma received a wedding invitation from Lily. Their daughter had found love with a kind, intelligent woman she'd met in graduate school. The ceremony would be small, held in a garden not far from where Emma and David had once lived together. The invitation included a note: "I'm asking Dad to walk me down the aisle, but Mom, I'd like you to give a reading. You both taught me so much about love, not just when you were together, but also in how you handled growing apart. I'm not afraid of marriage because of you. I'm entering it with open eyes because of what you showed me. Love, Lily." Emma cried when she read it, touched that something positive had come from their painful journey. She called David to tell him about the invitation. "She's braver than we were," David said. "More honest about what she wants and needs. She had good teachers in that regard," Emma replied. "We learned the hard way so she wouldn't have to." At the wedding, Emma watched David walk their daughter down the aisle, tears in his eyes. When it came time for her reading, she spoke clearly about love's resilience and many forms, about how it transforms but doesn't disappear, even when relationships change. At the reception, she and David shared a dance, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that would have seemed impossible years before. They had each built new lives. Emma had gone back to school and started a small business. David had moved to another state for work but remained close with Lily. They had both dated other people, learning from past mistakes, growing in new relationships. "We did good with her," David said, nodding toward Lily, radiant in her happiness. "We did," Emma agreed. "And maybe, in our own way, with each other too. It just took us a while to figure it out." As she drove home that night, Emma reflected on the long, complicated journey from that painful conversation at the dinner table to this moment of genuine peace. Divorce had not been the failure she once feared it would be, but rather a difficult passage to a different kind of life, one that had ultimately brought her back to herself. The unraveling of her marriage had been painful, but it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. In losing the future she had planned, she had gained one she could never have imagined. And that, she now understood, was not an ending at all, but the most profound kind of beginning.